In 1961, in the month of August, I went up to Hyannisport for 4 days. And the Berlin Wall had just gone up, and there was talk of war, but really talk of nuclear strikes. And I remember Jackie rang. I was staying at a nearby motel. Would I come over for dinner? And I said, I don't know. Should I have dinner with the president? Aren't you going to be the first people that the Russians blow up tonight? She said, we'll all go together. So I went over, and it was quite eerie. He was his usual self, a little irritable. It was just Jack and Jackie and 2 or 3 friends, and then aides in and out, in and out. And we never had really much idea. In retrospect, we know what was going on. He'd ordered the biggest and fastest military buildup in American history, at least since the Franklin Roosevelt's after Pearl Harbor. And as he talked, I could see more and more an enthusiasm for war. Why he should have had this, I don't know, but I'm putting it together in my head with the idea that our most famous presidents, from George Washington to certainly to Franklin Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, were presidents who presided over wars. The problem had been the Cold War was invented not by Stalin. It was invented by Harry Truman and the American industrialists, who wanted to keep the country on a military footing with this Wizard of Oz enemy, the Soviet Union, which was never any threat to us. Jack was of a younger generation, and he wanted to win the Cold War, which was just rhetoric for Eisenhower and rhetoric for Truman. And suddenly it began to fall into place, the inauguration. We'll bear any burden so that freedom will prevail. Well, this is a declaration of war on the Soviet Union. Then the first thing he does when he comes into office is he invades Cuba. Then he gets cold feet in the middle of the invasion and withdraws, which makes him look very bad. They try to blame it on Eisenhower, but it was totally Kennedy's responsibility. Then there was the business over Laos at Vienna between him and Khrushchev, in which we stepped aside, and that could be called a surrender on Laos. The missile crisis nearly brought the United States to a nuclear end, as we did not know at the time, but the Russian commanders with the missiles on the island of Cuba had nuclear weapons which could have taken out the entire United States except around the Seattle area. He was playing a very dangerous game in order to look like the Augustus of the West and the winner of this Cold War. And there's a phrase he kept using over and over again. It used to get on my nerves, too. Here we are in this twilight time. Well, I thought, for God's sake, you're a 43, 44-year-old president. You're not in your twilight at all. You're having a great time. And your main interest in life, aside from winning the Cold War, is what is Hope Lang really like? I mean, he wanted to know. There was not a movie star in Hollywood that he was not constantly tracking as part of, how shall we say, his athleticism. But here he is, twilight time. And now I've just gone over 4 pages of notes that I kept in that month of August, 1961 at Hyannisport. And it's schizophrenic. I mean, he is getting ready for war. Then he has moments of he switches back and forth. Jackie suddenly said, quite seriously, she said, the thought that you people make a war and my children are going to be killed, along with everybody else's. Don't you consider that? And he suddenly backed out. He said, well, look, I'm really a peace at any price man. I said, well, what's the military buildup all about? Well, it was political reasons. He would have to explain at the next election, which he was not certain of winning, particularly if Rockefeller was the candidate. He'd have to explain the Bay of Pigs, the loss of Laos. So the fateful decision was made. Vietnam. It looked like there was a civil war going on. We had agreed, Eisenhower had agreed, that we would go by the Geneva Accords, which made one country, which would hold democratic elections, which they did. And Ho Chi Minh was elected the president. Eisenhower said he could not be the president, as he was a communist. And Jack suddenly saw he had his war. We would go into this civil war in Southeast Asia, and he'd be a wartime president. So just before he went to Dallas, he sent 20,000 participating troops and committed us to the war, and said to a great friend of mine the day before he left for Dallas, he said, after Cuba and Laos, I've got to go all the way with this one. So I'm afraid he went to his death as a man who had committed the country to a war, which he might have ended earlier, we don't know, he didn't live, but a war that lasted 13 years and effectively ended the American hegemony of the world.